The van was white, a 2012 Ford Transit, small enough to navigate the back roads, just large enough to sleep in. On its side, a few stickers. On its dashboard, a camera. And inside, two young people documenting what looked like the beginning of the best time of their lives. Gabby Petito was 22. She had a camera, a plan, and a voice. A voice that came through the screen in calm tones and big smiles. She shared pictures of wildflowers in bloom, quiet trails deep in the Utah desert, and handwritten notes on her journey. Nothing seemed forced. Nothing looked out of place. Her partner, Brian Laundrie, appeared beside her in nearly every shot. He held the map. She held the lens. They posted from campgrounds, canyons, parking lots, and cafes. They were supposed to be gone for months. Just two people in a van, driving west, living light, chasing something they couldn't quite name. But on September 1st, Brian came back to Florida. Gabby didn't. He drove the van home alone. No public statement. No report. No explanation. No mention of the woman he had been living with in national parks, side by side, for weeks. Her parents didn't know yet. They thought she might be out of signal range, lost in the mountains, resting somewhere remote. But every hour that passed without a text, without a post, made that hope harder to hold. By the time they called the police, it had already been weeks since they'd last seen her face over FaceTime. Weeks since her last text. Weeks since her last confirmation that she was even alive. And now, there was a van parked neatly in a driveway in Northport, Florida, and inside it, there was no sign of Gabby Petito. Not her clothes. Not her phone. Not even the small journal she used to write in at night, when the days were too long for a camera lens. The only person who had seen her last had returned without her, and when they asked him where she was, he didn't say a word. Not to them. Not to police. Not to anyone. There was no evidence of a struggle. No eyewitnesses. There was number 911 call from a trailhead or campground. Just silence. A complete, unbroken silence that grew louder by the hour. Gabby's disappearance would go on to spark one of the most widely followed investigations in recent memory. Her face would be on every screen. Her name would be known by millions who never met her. Her story would become something far larger than a life she was living when she left home that summer. But before the searches, before the headlines, before the press conferences and protests, there was just a missing girl, and a quiet, empty van parked in the Florida sun, and a family trying to understand how a cross-country trip could simply end. No one saw it happen. No one called for help. But something did happen out there. Somewhere between the red rocks of Utah and the wide skies of Wyoming, something went terribly wrong. And the question that would follow would not be answered easily. This is not a story about a stranger in the dark. It's not about a crime of opportunity or a mistake made in passing. This is a story that played out slowly, on social media, in front of friends and strangers, in the photos they posted, the videos they filmed, and the spaces between what they chose to show and what they kept to themselves. Gabby Petito's disappearance is not just a case. It is a mirror, a moment that forced the world to stop and look more closely at what we think we see, at what lies beneath the surface of a smiling photo. So what really happened out there? Why did Gabby Petito disappear while the camera kept rolling? Long before her name was known around the world, before news helicopters circled a quiet Florida street, before hashtags and national headlines, Gabby Petito was just a girl from Long Island. She grew up in Blue Point, New York, a small town by the water, close-knit, familiar, the kind of place where people don't just know your name, they know your story. Gabby's story was one of light. She had an infectious smile and a laugh that came easily. Friends describe her as creative, sensitive, someone who loved being outdoors, painting, hiking, taking photos. Someone who saw the beauty in things most people walked past. She was the oldest of 6 siblings, a daughter, a sister, a friend. And even as a child, there was something about her energy that made people feel pulled in, drawn to her. After high school, like many her age, she wasn't quite sure what she wanted yet. She tried a few things, restaurant jobs, retail. She enrolled in community college briefly, but didn't feel fulfilled. What she really wanted was freedom. Freedom to explore, to travel, to create. And in 2019, that desire took shape in the form of a relationship. That's when she reconnected with Brian Laundrie. They had known each other in high school. He was quiet, artistic, into nature and minimalism. The two of them seemed to click instantly. Soon, they were inseparable. Gabby moved down to Florida to be with him and his family. To friends, it seemed like a big step. But Gabby was always open-hearted, always searching for meaning and connection. For her, love came with risk, and she didn't shy away from it. They moved into the Laundrie's home in Northport. Gabby took a job at a local Publix. Brian worked at a local juice bar. Side by side, they began building a future that looked different from the traditional route. No office jobs, no permanent address, just a road. Just them. In late 2020, they got engaged. And not long after, they started planning something bigger than a wedding. They bought a van, a used white Ford Transit that they gutted and rebuilt with their own hands. Gabby documented it all. From plywood layouts to curtain rods, from late-night painting sessions to test drives down Florida back roads. On her YouTube channel, she started uploading vlogs. Nothing flashy, just her voice narrating clips of them hiking, cooking, laughing in the back of the van. She named the channel Nomadic Static. Her captions were simple, vulnerable, sometimes poetic. "I love the way the desert sky feels endless," she once wrote. "I think this might be the happiest I've ever been." They set off in July 2021. The plan was to travel across the United States in 4 months. National parks, remote trails, shared experiences, shared silence. Her Instagram showed Zion, Bryce Canyon, Arches National Park. Pictures of Gabby doing cartwheels, meditating on cliff edges, walking barefoot through sand. Each photo more adventurous than the last. Her presence felt peaceful, intentional, as if she had finally found something she'd been looking for. The van life culture is often romanticized online. Filtered sunrises, minimalist interiors, smiles against a backdrop of open land. And for a while, Gabby and Brian seemed to fit that image. She captured their days with such tenderness, like time slowed down for them, like they had all the space they needed. But the camera only sees what it's shown. And not everything that was real made it into the frame. There were subtle moments, fragments and footage that, in retrospect, feel heavy. In one video, she laughs nervously as Brian shuts the van door behind her a little too fast. In another, her voice cracks slightly while describing the pressures of living full-time on the road. But these were buried beneath hours of soft music and beautiful landscapes. Easy to miss, easy to explain away. Until later, Gabby posted regularly. Her captions were thoughtful, optimistic, and often filled with gratitude. But those closest to her began to sense something wasn't entirely right. She'd call her parents, sometimes late at night, and talk about stress, tension, fights. But nothing she said suggested danger. Nothing that would trigger alarm. Relationships are complicated, so are road trips. And when two people are sharing a 20 square foot space, even the smallest disagreement can feel magnified. That was the assumption, at least. But in reality, there were cracks. And the cracks were getting wider. On August 12th, just weeks into the trip, Gabby and Brian had an encounter with police in Moab, Utah. A passerby had called 911 after witnessing what they described as a man slapping a woman in a van. Body cam footage would later show Gabby crying uncontrollably, apologizing, taking blame, describing a bad morning and a fight that got out of hand. Police separated them for the night. No charges were filed. The incident was marked as a mental health crisis, not a domestic dispute. But the footage told a story that didn't match the report. Gabby's voice trembled. Her hands fidgeted. Brian, by contrast, was calm, almost rehearsed. Still, the trip continued. They moved on to new locations, posted new content. On the surface, things looked fine, but something had changed. The images became fewer, the captions shorter. The distance between posts grew longer. Gabby stopped updating her YouTube. Her tone changed in text. She began telling her family that she couldn't talk as much, that self-service was spotty, that everything was okay. But on August 25th, her mother received the last known FaceTime call from her daughter. Gabby was in Wyoming, tired, but smiling. She promised call again soon. She never did. And just like that, the silence began. Slow at first, then complete. Behind the smiles and sunsets, something had already begun to break. August 2021. Summer was still hanging on in the western United States. The air was dry, the parks crowded with travelers making the most of the open roads. And somewhere among them, Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie were still on their journey. From Utah to Colorado to Wyoming, their van kept moving. Gabby was posting less frequently now. Her captions were shorter. Sometimes a photo showed only landscapes, not her. Other times, she looked tired, not exhausted, just distant. But to the outside world, the trip was continuing. The last full photo of her smiling would be uploaded on August 25th, standing in front of a butterfly mural in Ogden, Utah. The caption read simply, "Happy Halloween." The timestamp was off. The post felt hollow. And later, her mother would admit something about that photo felt wrong. But no one knew that yet. The cracks were now visible, not just in hindsight, but in real time. And on August 12th, those cracks would open wider than anyone realized. It happened in Moab, Utah, just after 4:30 p.m. A call came into the local police department. A bystander had seen something troubling outside a grocery store. A man and a woman arguing near a white van. According to the 911 transcript, the man was seen hitting the woman, slapping her, pushing her. The caller had followed the van until officers arrived. A traffic stop was initiated. Lights flashed. The white van pulled over on the side of the highway. And what followed was captured on police body cameras. Footage that would later be scrutinized frame by the public, media, and investigators. Gabby was visibly distressed, her voice shaky, her eyes red. She kept apologizing over and over, saying it was her fault, that she had been struggling with OCD, that she had gotten upset. Brian stood apart, calm, relaxed, even laughing with officers at points. Gabby told them they'd been arguing, that she was stressed about the blog, that sometimes she got overwhelmed. She didn't mention being afraid. She didn't accuse Brian of hurting her, but her body language, trembling hands, panic speech, avoiding eye contact, painted another picture. Police made the decision to separate them for the night. Gabby kept the van. Brian was taken to a motel. No charges were filed. No one was arrested. The report labeled the situation as a mental health incident, not a domestic dispute. But the question remains, did they miss something? In the footage, Gabby apologizes to officers for crying. She says she just wants to be better. Brian, meanwhile, jokes about his dirty feet and shares stories from their trip. The imbalance is clear. But at the time, no alarms were raised. Gabby's mother would later say she knew her daughter. And something about that video, the tone, the fear in Gabby's voice didn't sit right. Still, the trip continued. By late August, the couple had moved into Wyoming. Grand Teton National Park was their next stop. Wide plains, jagged peaks, isolated trailheads. On August 24th, Gabby and her mom spoke over FaceTime. It would be the last confirmed video call. Gabby looked tired, but okay. She promised to stay in touch. The next day, August 25th, was the last time her mother heard Gabby's voice. After that, it was only text messages. And the messages didn't sound like her. On August 27th, Gabby's family received a text from her phone. "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." Stan was her grandfather, but Gabby never called him Stan. Her mother knew it immediately. Someone else had written that. The final message came on August 30th. It read, "No service in Yosemite." But Gabby wasn't in Yosemite. She wasn't even close. By then, it's believed Gabby was already gone. Brian Laundrie returned to Florida on September 1st. Alone, he drove the same white van across the country, 2,300 miles from Wyoming to Northport, Florida, and pulled quietly into his parents' driveway. No police report. No missing person alert. No announcement. He came home. She didn't. Neighbors would later say he acted like nothing was wrong. Mowing the lawn, running errands, going on bike rides with his mother. The van was cleaned. Items were taken inside. Gabby's belongings, the things she brought on the trip, were missing. And yet, no one in Brian's family called her parents. 10 days passed. 10 days of silence. 10 days where Gabby's family tried to reach her, texted her, called her, and got no reply. No updates. No location pings. No contact. On September 11th, Gabby Petito was officially reported missing by her family in New York. By then, it had been 16 days since she last posted, 17 days since her last confirmed video call, and almost 3 weeks since the Moab traffic stop. Police went to the Laundrie home. They knocked on the door. They asked to speak with Brian. They were told he wasn't available. His family refused to answer questions. They handed over the name of a lawyer instead. Gabby was over 2,000 miles from home. Her voice had vanished. And the only person who had come back from that trip wasn't saying a word. September 11, 2021, Gabby Petito's mother, Nicole Schmidt, stood in front of a police officer in Suffolk County, New York, and filed a missing person report. She had waited, hoped, texted, called, reached out to Brian's parents, and received nothing back. Not a word, not an explanation, just silence. By then, it had been over 2 weeks since she had last heard her daughter's voice. She wasn't worried anymore. She was terrified. When the report was filed, the case was local, quiet, a young woman, 2,000 miles from home, missing on a cross-country trip. But something about it felt different, and it didn't stay local for long. That night, the story began spreading on social media, first through friends and mutual followers, then through true crime pages, then through TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. The hashtag appeared quickly. Hashtag Find Gabby Petito. People began posting the last photos she'd shared. The van, her smile, the butterfly mural, the last known locations, the timeline, the gaps, the inconsistencies. And as more people learned she'd been traveling with a partner who had returned home without her, the outrage grew louder. Within 24 hours, her name was trending nationally. It wasn't just a missing person case anymore. It had become a story. And stories, especially the ones that unfold in real time, travel fast. In Northport, Florida, media trucks pulled up in front of the Laundrie home. Cameras zoomed in on the white van parked neatly in the driveway. Commentators began speculating. YouTubers broke down the timeline. TikTok sleuths dissected body cam footage from Moab, frame by frame, trying to spot something everyone else had missed. Candlelight vigils were held in Gabby's hometown. People who had never met her left handwritten notes, candles, sunflowers. Across the country, viewers clung to every update, every interview with her father, every tearful plea from her mother, every press release from police. The case became a mirror, a national fixation shaped by emotion, justice, and fear. And through it all, Brian Laundrie said nothing, not one word to Gabby's family, not one word to the police. Instead, within days of Gabby being reported missing, the Laundrie family announced they had retained a lawyer. The statement read, "On the advice of counsel, the Laundrie family is remaining in the background at this juncture and will have no further comment." The Petito family responded publicly. They begged the Laundries to speak, to help, to say anything that could lead them to their daughter. But there was no cooperation, no statement, no answers. The pressure mounted. Outside the Laundrie home, protesters arrived, holding signs, shouting Gabby's name, demanding justice. The neighborhood was flooded with reporters. The FBI joined the case. Search warrants were prepared. Phone records, hard drives, social media accounts, all became evidence. And the public began to fill in the blanks. There were gaps in the timeline, places where Gabby and Brian had supposedly traveled but never posted from. Days where neither their phones had activity. Rumors of sightings. Messages that didn't sound like Gabby. Locations that didn't make sense. And theories began to surface. Some rational, others wild, but all fueled by the same thing: the lack of information, the silence, the vanishing of a voice that had once been so open and present. On September 15th, the Northport police officially named Brian Laundrie a person of interest in the case. They asked him to come in for questioning. He refused. They asked the Laundries to cooperate. They refused. By then, the van had already been taken by authorities. Forensics teams combed through it, looking for traces, fingerprints, hairs, blood, notes, receipts. But what they found, if anything, wasn't made public. Not yet. All eyes were now on Brian. Brian Laundrie had disappeared. According to his parents, he had left the house 3 days earlier, on September 14th, to go for a hike in the nearby Carlton Reserve, a massive stretch of swampland in Sarasota County. He never came back. And now, the only person who might have known what happened to Gabby was missing too. First, Gabby vanished into silence. Then, the only one who returned vanished too. The headlines were multiplying. Each day brought more questions, more outrage, more silence. Outside the Laundrie home in Northport, Florida, the scene was growing louder. Protesters with signs, strangers yelling through bullhorns. Reporters angled their cameras at the front door, waiting for a glimpse, any sign of movement. A quote, a response. Inside the house, Brian Laundrie was nowhere to be found. Police continued to knock. His parents said he had gone hiking days earlier, into the swamps of the Carlton Reserve, a nearly 25,000-acre expanse of dense marsh, wild hogs, water moccasins, and alligators. They claimed he left with a backpack. No phone, no wallet, no explanation. Law enforcement launched a search. They used drones, heat sensors, K-9 units, boats, ATVs, hundreds of hours logged. But Brian was gone. The public focus shifted quickly from "where's Gabby" to "what is Brian hiding?" Photos began circulating. Brian mowing the lawn after his return, shopping with his mother at a store, walking through the neighborhood like nothing had happened, while Gabby was still missing, still unheard from, still unseen. The image of a man maintaining his routine, while the rest of the world unraveled, left a bitter taste. Online, people began calling him out directly. Comment sections flooded. Forums exploded. True crime creators uploaded video after video, analyzing his every move, every pause in the Moab footage, every step on the timeline. And then, September 19th, 2021, a body was found. The search had moved to Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming, near the area where Gabby and Brian had been last seen. It was remote, quiet, unforgiving terrain. Authorities announced that human remains had been located near a campsite. 2 days later, the FBI confirmed what everyone feared. It was Gabby. Her body had been found in a shallow grave, partially covered by rocks and brush. The autopsy would later reveal the cause of death: homicide by manual strangulation. She had died weeks earlier, likely around August 27th, just days after the odd Stan text message. She was 22 years old. The timeline, once foggy, began to sharpen. Gabby's last confirmed sighting was on August 25th. Brian returned home on September 1st. Gabby's family reported her missing on September 11th. Her body was found on September 19th. In those critical days, from her final message to the moment her mother picked up the phone and called the police, Brian had been home. Quiet, uncooperative, silent, and then gone. Brian Laundrie was now the only person known to have been with Gabby in her final days. The only person who might have known what happened between them in those isolated woods. The only person who could answer what no one else could. Law enforcement officially declared him a suspect. The search for him intensified. Police combed the Carlton Reserve. News helicopters hovered above. Reporters set up camp on sidewalks. The Petito family held press conferences, begging, pleading, demanding justice. And in the middle of it all, details began to emerge. Witnesses came forward, travelers, hikers, vloggers, who had crossed paths with Gabby and Brian during their trip. Some described a cheerful couple, Others remembered tension. One couple said they had seen Brian acting strangely at a campground around August 26. In one reported sighting, Gabby had been crying in a restaurant in Jackson, Wyoming, while Brian grew angry at staff, reportedly storming in and out of the building multiple times. These stories weren't definitive, but together they painted a pattern, a growing instability in their relationship, a history of emotional volatility. Then came the text messages between Gabby and her family, the ones that didn't sound like her, the ones that made her mother stop in her tracks. Can you help, Stan? No service in Yosemite. Wrong wording, wrong tone, wrong locations. Some experts later speculated she may have already been dead when they were sent. Still, Brian didn't speak. Still, his parents said nothing. Still, no arrest had been made. And so the questions kept growing louder. If Brian had nothing to hide, why had he vanished? If he loved her, why hadn't he helped search? And if he was innocent, why not say a word? With Gabby's killer still uncharged, the question became clear. Where's Brian Laundrie? The search for Gabby had ended in tragedy, but the search for Brian Laundrie had only just begun. With the discovery of Gabby's remains confirmed, the focus shifted. The silence that once surrounded Brian was replaced by nationwide urgency. He was no longer just a person of interest. He was now the central figure in a homicide investigation. Police returned to the Carlton Reserve, a swampy, treacherous stretch of land in Sarasota County, Florida. Over 24,000 acres. Dense brush, water up to the knees in some places. Home to venomous snakes and alligators. Difficult to search. Even harder to survive in for long. That's where his parents said he'd gone. No phone, no wallet, no explanation. Law enforcement searched for days, weeks. Helicopters flew overhead. Divers entered murky waters. Cadaver dogs swept the brush. Heat sensors scanned from the air. Nothing. At the same time, the case was expanding in a different direction. Not into the woods, but into the past. The Moab police stop from August 12th, now publicly available, was facing intense scrutiny. Advocacy groups for domestic violence victims reviewed the footage. Experts noted Gabby's body language, her tendency to apologize, her avoidance of blame, her panic. Many asked a painful question. Had police failed to protect her? Under public pressure, the Moab City Police Department launched an internal investigation. They acknowledged that their officers had mishandled the situation, that they didn't apply Utah's mandatory arrest laws for domestic violence, that signs of abuse had been missed. It was a haunting realization that Gabby may have cried for help in plain sight, and that the moment to save her had already passed. By October, over a month had gone by. Gabby had been laid to rest. Brian was still missing. And then the story shifted again. October 20th, 2021. Brian's parents, Chris and Roberta Laundrie, informed the FBI they intended to search the Carlton Reserve themselves, specifically a trail Brian had frequented. They arrived early, walking alongside law enforcement. Within hours, human remains were found, next to a dry bag and a notebook, under thick vegetation. Partial skeletal remains were discovered in an area that had previously been underwater. Dental records confirmed the identity. Brian Laundrie. He was dead. A gunshot wound to the head. A self-inflicted injury. Just like that, the last living person who might have explained what happened in Wyoming was gone. And what he left behind was a notebook. Water damaged, smeared in places, but mostly intact. When its contents were released months later, it offered what so many had demanded, a confession. In it, Brian admitted to killing Gabby. He described her as injured, cold, in pain. He claimed it was a mercy, that she had fallen, and that he had ended her suffering. But the language was vague, the circumstances inconsistent, the tone defensive. There was no detail about what caused her injuries, no mention of why he left her, why he lied, why he never called for help, why he drove the van home, why he stayed silent. There was only one clear sentence in the pages of justification. I ended her life. For many, the notebook was closure, a confirmation of what they had suspected all along. But for others, it raised more questions than answers. Why had Brian written that he killed her out of compassion when the autopsy showed she was strangled? Why had he fled instead of turning himself in? And why had his parents waited so long to share what they knew? Some believe Brian's notebook was a final attempt to rewrite the story, to paint himself in a more human light, even after death. Others saw it as a coward's confession, buried in a swamp where no one could challenge it. What's certain is that no trial would happen. No courtroom cross-examinations. No questions under oath. No chance for Gabby's family to face the man who took their daughter's life. Just a few damp pages, a shallow grave, and silence. Brian was gone. Gabby was gone. And yet, many were left wondering, after everything was justice ever truly served. In the days after Brian Laundrie's remains were identified, the Petito and Schmidt families gathered again, not for another press conference, but for something else entirely. It wasn't closure, because closure for them would never fully come, not with the loss of their daughter, not with the unanswered questions, not with the haunting silence left in the wake of so many missed signs. But it was the beginning of something new. They launched the Gabby Petito Foundation. Its mission, to support organizations that assist victims of domestic violence and missing persons, to be a voice in Gabby's name for those still silenced, for the families still searching, for the victims who are still being overlooked. They turned their grief into advocacy, their heartbreak into something tangible, not just to remember their daughter, but to protect others from experiencing the same. And as they built that legacy, the world kept talking. But now, the conversation had changed. Social media had once been a tool for sharing van life photos and picturesque sunsets. But during Gabby's disappearance, it had transformed into something else. A hive of digital detectives. A crowd-sourced investigation. And for better or worse, a place where people clung to every clue, every post, every theory. Some of those internet sleuths, strangers watching from home, had made a difference. It was a couple reviewing their travel footage that led to a major break in the case. They had unknowingly filmed Gabby and Brian's van parked along a remote road in Wyoming, time-stamped and geotagged. That tip guided search crews to the exact area where Gabby's remains were eventually found. Other users helped amplify the story. The hashtag #FindGabbyPetito became one of the most widespread online movements of 2021. It pushed the case onto national headlines. It kept the pressure alive when official statements slowed. It reminded people to keep looking, to keep asking. But it also raised hard questions. Why had Gabby's case received so much attention, while so many others didn't? What about the missing women of color? The indigenous women whose disappearances rarely made national news? The Petito family addressed those questions directly. They said they knew the attention Gabby received was rare. And they said they wanted to use that attention, not to overshadow others, but to help bring awareness to those still waiting to be found. Meanwhile, questions about the Moab police stop lingered. How much had the officers known? Should they have separated the couple that night? Did they misread the signs of fear in Gabby's voice? An independent review later found that the officers had made several unintentional mistakes. They failed to follow state law, which required an arrest in domestic violence cases. They didn't consult a senior officer. They misclassified the incident as a mental health crisis rather than a potential assault. It wasn't malice, but it was a failure, and Gabby paid the price. In the aftermath, lawmakers across the country began proposing new protocols for domestic violence calls, mandatory training for officers, standardized response forms, access to trauma specialists. Some even proposed a new bill, informally named Gabby's Law, that would establish clear requirements for how police respond to potential domestic violence situations in remote or isolated settings. The law hadn't passed yet, but it had sparked a national conversation. And beneath all the legislation, the hashtags, the press conferences, there were the people, women who watched the body cam footage and saw their own past staring back at them. Survivors who remembered the apologies, the excuses, the fear, the bruises that faded long before the memories. People who hadn't spoken out, but who did, because Gabby couldn't anymore. In Gabby's story, millions saw the parts of their lives that no one else had ever noticed. And in that way, Gabby's voice, silence in the wilderness of Wyoming, began echoing again through foundations, through families speaking out, through victims who no longer felt invisible, through legislation that might still save someone else. Gabby's voice was silenced, but her story is still being told. In the end, it wasn't just a crime story. It wasn't just about a couple on the road or a police report or a body in the woods. It became something else entirely. A national mirror, a cultural wake-up call, a deeply personal grief that spilled across phone screens and living room televisions, across headlines and hashtags. Gabby Petito's name became known around the world. But behind every post, every press briefing, and every photograph of her smiling against a desert sky, there was still a question that no one could shake. Could she have been saved? There were so many moments where someone might have stepped in, the police stop in Moab, the strange text messages, the missing days between sightings, so many chances to ask harder questions, to pause, to act. But those moments slipped by, one by one, and then came the other questions, the uncomfortable ones. Why did it take millions of views and retweets for Gabby's case to be taken seriously? Why did the internet have to do what trained investigators struggled to? And what about all the others? The missing whose faces weren't shared on national news. The families who held vigils in empty parking lots. Who stapled flyers to telephone poles. Who waited years for even a single headline. It wasn't just one girl who vanished. It was a realization of how unequal attention can be. Gabby was young, white, blonde. Her social media pages were filled with carefully framed moments, van doors open to a canyon, her head tilted toward the sun, soft filters cast across desert trails. She looked like an influencer, a dreamer, but her story, though tragic, wasn't unique. Every year in the United States, over 600,000 people are reported missing. Of those, thousands never make it to your screen. Black women, indigenous girls, LGBTQ plus teens, homeless youth, people whose names remain known only to their families, and whose pain rarely makes national waves. And yet, Gabby's story did. Not because it was the most shocking, but because people chose to see it, to share it, to care. And that visibility created movement, dialogue, advocacy. Gabby became a symbol, not just of what was lost, but of what needed to change. Her family leaned into that reality. They knew the attention wasn't universal, and they didn't run from the criticism. Instead, they used it. The Gabby Petito Foundation began sharing other missing person cases, elevating stories the media had ignored, partnering with organizations across the country, speaking in rooms filled with lawmakers, testifying, lobbying, hoping. But Gabby's impact stretched beyond politics or police reform. It reached the silent corners of relationships, to the girls who smiled in photos while hiding bruises beneath their sleeves, to the friends who scrolled past someone's Instagram post, not realizing the caption was a cry for help, to the victims who had been told it was just a rough patch, just jealousy, just love expressed the wrong way. Gabby's death forced the world to confront what domestic abuse can look like when it doesn't fit the usual image. It looks like a couple laughing on YouTube. It looks like a van parked under the stars. It looks like a girl wiping her eyes in the back of a police car, saying she's the one who's sorry. And it reminded us all that love should never hurt. That no amount of adventure, of aesthetic posts or perfect filters, can hide what's happening behind closed doors. Gabby wanted to explore the world. That was her dream, to travel, to live freely, to document beauty, to chase sunlight. Instead, the world came looking for her. And though she can't speak now, others can. Her story lives on in legislation being written, in families now willing to speak out, in survivors who finally recognize themselves in a story they didn't ask to watch, in mothers teaching their daughters what love should feel like, in fathers who now listen closer. Gabby's legacy is not only what she lost, but what she gave. A reminder, a warning, a reason to see people fully, not just through filters. To ask again when something feels wrong. To never confuse silence with safety. Gabby's voice was silenced, but her story is still being told. In courtrooms, in classrooms, in living rooms, and in every person who now knows the signs and refuses to look away. She was young, adventurous, full of wonder. Gabby Petito set out to explore the world, to document freedom, nature, and love. She believed in chasing moments worth capturing. But in the end, the moment that captured her was one she never got to share. A cross-country trip, a tragic end, a silence that told a louder story than any scream. She traveled with someone who claimed to love her, someone who stood beside her through desert trails and national parks, someone who returned home with a van they lived in, but not with her. And for days, he said nothing. Not to her family, not to law enforcement, not to the millions watching, begging for answers. He disappeared into the background, while her face lit up every screen in the country. But she had already vanished. What happened out there? What broke in that silence between state lines and empty trails? How does someone go from smiling in front of a canyon to becoming a national headline of loss? And why did it take the world watching, retweeting, reposting, refreshing for her story to be taken seriously? There are no easy answers, but there are questions, and they remain. Could Gabby's life have been saved? Was there a moment, a single decision, that could have changed the ending? Who should have seen more? Who should have acted? And what about the others? Because while Gabby's name is known, there are thousands more you've never heard. People who disappeared quietly, whose stories never became hashtags. People whose cases didn't trend, whose families didn't get press conferences, whose photos didn't reach national news. Gabby's story lit up a nation, but it also exposed something darker, how some voices are amplified while others go unheard. Race, appearance, social media, geography. The uncomfortable truth is that not all missing persons are treated equally, and that truth has consequences. Gabby's family understands that. That's why they didn't stop when the case was closed. They built a foundation. They started conversations. They shared platforms, not just to honor Gabby, but to help others, to demand better response systems, to give names back to the nameless. Gabby Petito is more than a victim of tragedy. Her life and the attention it received force America to confront how we treat victims, how we view abuse, how we define justice. Her story reminded us that trauma doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles through a photo. Sometimes it says, "I'm fine," in the middle of a traffic stop. Sometimes it never gets a chance to speak at all. We live in a world where it's easy to miss the signs, easy to believe what looks perfect, easy to scroll past what's really happening. But maybe Gabby's story makes us look longer, ask harder, care more, because love should never leave someone afraid, because freedom should never lead to silence, because adventure should never end in tragedy. So we ask again, what do you think could have changed the outcome of this case? If someone had acted sooner, if a call had been made, if a question had been asked one more time, would she still be here? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe stories like Gabby's matter, if you think these lives deserve to be remembered, spoken about, and never ignored, subscribe to Dark Trail File. Because silence should never have the last word. And because there are still stories waiting to be heard, Gabby's voice was taken from her. But her story, it's still being told. In courtrooms, in classrooms, in homes where people are finally having the hard conversations, in survivors who now know they're not invisible. This wasn't the ending she deserved, but maybe it's the beginning of something better for someone else. In memory of Gabby Petito and all those still missing, if you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, please seek help. Contact a local crisis center or call a domestic violence hotline. Subscribe, like, comment,